human beings, we're wired to be connected. From birth, we look for that connection. Where internet connectivity ends and a non-connected society exists, the desire exists to be connected. Once they find connectivity, this city starts to grow. It grows first from an educational perspective.
No longer can the top 3 goals of education be reading, writing, and arithmetic. Now I truly believe that they need to be relationships, relationships, relationships.
Exploration is not a bucket list where you simply check off places that you have been. You need to realize that you are in a frontier and there's always new discoveries to be made, oftentimes just by changing the way you make the observation.
You're exercising a muscle here every time you exercise empathy, and that's emotional intelligence. Continue that curiosity, ask questions.
Because of that respect and my willingness to listen and his willingness to listen to me, he ended up leaving the Klan, and there's his robe right there.
This is the world we're playing with right now. And the reality is that we don't really know how it's going to look and what it's about.
So many people are looking for feeding their spiritual hunger. The human nature gap is real. The human nature gap is having ramifications.
What if we take an idea and then we embrace it, challenge our belief systems, challenge our perspectives? And today we're going to take one step beyond, and we're going to go that way and just seek new ideas.
Hey, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, good day. I'm Arthur Zards, the Executive Director of TEDx Naperville. Welcome to our virtual salon. Again, while no signature event this year, we are going to be doing more salons, smaller, intimate events and virtual salons. And if you have any ideas, or we'd like to have your feedback, if you like the salon, if you have any ideas for guests, if you want to be featured as a guest, drop us a line and let us know. This salon is a continuation of October 23rd with Dr. Mark Brady. This one is a deep dive, so I just want to give you a warning. This will get technical. This will get complicated, and you will probably need to pay attention. So we know that you're, with our audience, our curiosity seekers, that you're always up for a challenge. Well, tonight we deliver. And believe me, your attention will be rewarded. And be prepared to be at least a little bit worried about the salon. Before we begin, I want to thank our partners. I want to thank Nokia. They're celebrating their Bell Labs 100th anniversary in April. Look for a TEDx Naperville salon on their campus this spring. There will be parallel celebrations across the Nokia campus. I'd like to thank LabZ, Transformative Thinking into Action. If you or your organization's communication lacks clarity, doesn't engage, or lacks story, get in touch with me. I am LabZ, and I lead workshops on storytelling and the TED style of speaking. I want to thank Wadent. Wadent is a Chicago-based SOC 2 cybersecurity and IT outsourcer that supports and manages SMB technology. They're our very first sponsor from 15 years ago. I'd like to thank Cinema Group. They're a strategic marketing consultancy and services group focused on the technology sector. They help startups all the way up to Fortune 500 companies grow tech investments. And Jonathan, our producer here, is part of the Cinema Group. So I'd like to thank our partners. Without them, we can't do this because TEDx Naperville is 100% volunteer-based. Mark's going to start with a presentation, and we're going to get interactive from the very first slide that he shows. We're going to be looking for questions from you, the audience. Put your questions or comments in the chat. This is a deep dive, so there's no such thing as dumb questions. If anything, I'm going to be asking the dumb questions. But we want you to have the opportunity to come into the conversation. So don't be dissuaded to be part of this conversation, because it may get technical. Jonathan's going to drop, I believe, Jonathan, you get either an email or a link where if you click on it, if you have a webcam, you can actually get brought into our green room, and Jonathan, the producer, will bring you into the live stream to talk to Mark directly. So look for that in the chat link. Use Chrome. If you have a Chrome browser, that's the recommended browser to do that. I want to start off with our introduction. I met Mark at a CDO officers meeting in Washington, D.C. 6 months ago. Dr. Mark Brady is currently Deputy Chief Data Officer of the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense and Research and Engineering, TTRMC. He's a Senior Manager at KBR. He has served as a Data Center Officer for the Space Force, Chief Data Officer for the Air Force Space Command, Data Architect for the Department of Justice and Information. Sorry, there's a lot to go here. Mark, you have a very long bio. Information Architect for the National Marine Fisheries Services. Mark also helped establish electronic trade standards as a U.S. delegate to the United Nations, served on the White House Data Cabinet and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Big Data Council. Prior to his federal service, he conducted basic scientific research in neuroscience, taught neuroscience and statistics, conducted industrial R&D and artificial intelligence, software, medical electronics, traffic management, electrophoresis, and mathematical modeling for the automotive geometry. He's an inventor and author with a number of patents from his work in the industry. Welcome, Dr. Mark Brady.
Thanks, Arthur.
That was difficult. Incredible experience. By the way, thank you for coming back again, because as the audience knows, and they can see on the same link that they're watching the stream, we have the previous stream when you talked about the 6 laws of AI, and you started to talk a little bit about this first singularity. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to tee this up for you. I'm really, just for the audience, we did a little precursor and we looked at some of the information. This is a fascinating deep dive, and I'm really excited, just for my own personal benefit, but for the audience. And I'm going to have you go ahead and jump in and lead with the show. And again, while Mark is talking, put your questions or comments in the chat. We're going to bring those into the conversation. And if you're feeling bold enough, the link that Jonathan's going to send you, our producer, we can bring you into the conversation and you can interact with us on this live stream. So the show's yours, Mark.
Okay, great.
So one quick second, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Here's the deal, just to clarify for Arthur. This is my email. If you send me an email with your email address and question, I will send you the link, okay? It's just, if I put the link up, I don't really have control over who's coming in. This way we know who's going to come in. So please send the email to me, which is jonathan.ruff@cinemagroup.com with your question, and we will work to try to bring you in, okay? Sorry.
And that's our producer, Jonathan, so from Nashville. So thank you for dropping in. Excellent. All right, so Mark, I'll let you start with the show.
All right, let's go with the first slide. All right, so for those of you who were with us when we talked about second singularity and AI, you're familiar with what a singularity is. And for those of you who are not there, who may not know what a singularity is, I'll explain briefly. So during World War II, during the development of the atomic bomb, one of the greatest scientific minds ever, von Neumann, had a discussion with another atomic scientist, a mathematician, Stanislaw Ulam. And during that discussion, von Neumann brought up this idea that at some point, technology may take off in a way that humans lose control over it. And then Ulam was the one who then published that conversation, and that's why we know about it today. So when people normally talk about the singularity, they're talking about the AI singularity, a singularity that's caused by AI. However, another singularity which has received very little attention is the first singularity, and this is a singularity that's going to occur prior to the AI singularity. Next slide. So it's often said that data is the new oil. So I'm going to use the metaphor of an oil refinery to describe a data system. The data system is very similar to an oil refinery. In an oil refinery, you have places where oil is stored, other chemicals are stored. You have places where that oil and chemicals are processed. And then, of course, you have pipes which connect all these things, and the chemicals flow from one node to another. So the idea of a data system is very simple. So one shouldn't get tied up in thinking that, hey, this is beyond my comprehension or whatever. It's extremely simple. But where it gets complicated is in the implementation, and I'll explain why and how it gets complicated. So first of all, geographically, some of those nodes might be in a gigantic data center like the one that you see here. The largest one is in China. It's 10 million square feet. There's a number of them in the United States. So some of the nodes for a particular data system might be in a place like this. For the same data system, you might have other of its nodes in other gigantic data centers. Some of them might be on premises for your organization. Some of the nodes are going to be on laptops, cell phones, Internet of Things, all those sorts of places, all for one data system. Then you have the fact that these data systems are connected to other data systems. So some of the organizations that I work for have hundreds of data systems and thousands of databases within those systems. So when I say database, that's just one of those storage places where they're storing information. So you can imagine how complicated that gets when you start connecting all these things together. And we call that a super system, the connection of many different data systems together. These connections can even go outside the organization, and so they transcend multiple organizations.
Mark,
So to really understand data systems, yeah, go ahead.
What's an example of a super data system for the average Joe, like for me? Because I understand. So like a data system would be like my Department of Motor Vehicle information, like my driver's license information. And would a super system be something like Experian that ties together all this? Because that's where I'm a little bit lost. I want to.
There's usually, even in one data system, there's usually multiple databases, and there's usually multiple software modules. So software, of course, is where the data is processed in software modules and in applications. So an application is a software node. It's a processing node that just has a human that can look at it. So an application is a kind of processing node as well. So there's usually multiple processing nodes, multiple data storage nodes, which we call databases, and all of the pipes that connect them together, just in a single data system, typically.
But what's a super system that I could relate to?
Well, say.
Or am I not supposed to know that? Like, is that part of the problem?
I was trying to think of like where I can give an example without violating something. But imagine you have a large organization. It has different departments. In those departments, their data is interrelated. And so you're going to have some of these pipes that are going to connect the different departments' data systems.
Okay, got it.
Okay. So, and then as I say, so that creates a super system, and then that super system may be connected to other super systems. What do we call that? A super system, whatever. So that can become.
Is that the actual name for that? Super? Is there another term for it?
I just made that up now, but we can use that going forward. So in order to understand even one data system, you need to know what all those connections are, but also within each node. So you have a storage node. You just don't dump data into that. It has a structure, and you need to understand what that structure is before you can say you understand the system. And in a processing node, Of course, you have algorithms, the rules, the steps of processing all that information using software. And unless you know what those are, then you still don't understand the system. What's flowing on the pipes? What's the structure of all those messages? Are there files? Is there streaming data? What's the format of it? All of that is necessary in order to understand even a single data system. So imagine what would happen if you couldn't see the data system. You have to maintain it. The analysts that are using it have to understand the data that's coming out of it, and they can't understand the data that's coming out of it unless they know what it is. And if you want to decommission one, how can you decommission it if you don't understand it? So in an example that I experienced in one organization, they decommissioned a particular data system. You would think they could just throw a switch and turn it off, right? It took them a full year. And the reason it took them a full year was because they didn't know what they were unplugging. So if you start unplugging things and you start breaking things, then that's going to be a big problem, right? So you can't move forward, you can't move back, you can't really do anything without causing some trouble, without the visibility. Okay, next slide. All right, so am I the only one that has this perspective? The Chief Data Officer magazine recently conducted a survey of its members, and they found that only 25% of respondents strongly agreed that they have full visibility into their data pipelines. And 90% of organizations take hours to weeks to resolve pipeline issues. Well, why is that? Well, it's because if you change anything, you're going to break things downstream. And the only way that you find out is somebody calls you up and they say, well, you just broke my thing. And we couldn't anticipate it.
Wait, so this slide kind of scares me. So if I'm because I don't come from the data background, and maybe people, watching this too, and they could throw in their thoughts. So if my data somewhere, be it on Netflix or with my phone provider, the DMV, based on this, 25% of the people that are supposedly in charge of all that data, only 25% have any visibility. The rest are just more like, I don't know, it's there somewhere. Is that
That's right. That's right. And so what we call those other things, that other 75%, they're black boxes.
Black boxes.
You can't see into them. You don't know what they're doing. So there's three reasons. So you're expressing some concern, and rightly so. And I want to explain to people why they should care about this, whether you are a technical person or whether you're not a technical person. The first reason you should care about it is that there's very little that you do in life these days that does not involve a data system. So you may say, well, you know what? I'm going to just totally step out of this data system world. I'm going to go to a national park. I'm going to take a hike. Well, guess what? That national park is run by people using data systems. Maybe you will use your GPS to navigate to that location or to understand the trail system. And then you have another data system in your vehicle. So you can't get away from it. I think it would be extremely rare, maybe impossible, that you would do anything in life that doesn't involve a data system. The second reason takes us back into AI. So the cause of this is not AI. That's what distinguishes the first singularity from the second singularity. But we'll touch on AI here and there where it's relevant. Where does AI live? It lives in these data systems. And in our last salon, which is up on YouTube, right, Arthur?
Yes.
In the last salon, we talked about keeping AI safe and the possible dangers of AI, how to manage those. Well, this is another aspect of AI safety. You have something which is living in a black box. How can you possibly manage it? And then the third concern is with cybersecurity. We hear about massive break-ins all the time. There's a a number of other ones that you don't hear about. And these can have some very serious national security and monetary considerations and impacts. How can you keep something secure if you can't see it, if you don't know how it works, if you don't know what the vulnerabilities are? So those are the three reasons why this is important to us. And it's largely invisible to most people. And even the people who are working inside these places don't really have full visibility in the various parts. They may have visibility in their own little part, but because that's not being shared and documented among multiple technical folks, largely they're all dealing with black boxes. Okay, next slide. Okay, let's go to the videos. We've got a couple of clips for you from a movie called Idiocracy. Idiocracy is a film that takes place in the future. It's a parody, and among other things, it deals with a singularity, that people have lost control of their technology. One of the reasons is that they have de-evolved, but there may be other reasons that we're going to talk about today. So go ahead and run the first clip, Jonathan.
Thank you. Please speak your name as it appears on your current federal identity card. Document number G24L8.
Well, I'm not sure if...
You have entered the name Not Sure. Is this correct? Not Sure.
No, it's not correct.
Thank you. Not is correct. Is Sure correct?
No, it's not. My name is
Already
Joe.
confirmed. Your first name is Not. Please confirm your last name, Sure.
My last name is not Sure.
Thank you.
No, what I mean is
Sure.
my name is Joe.
Is complete. Please wait while I tattoo your new identity on your arm.
Wait a second. Can we start over? Can I cancel this? Can we cancel this and just go back and begin it? They're going to Ow! Could I speak to your supervisor?
Please hold still for your photograph.
All right. So we've all had experiences like that. Okay, Jonathan, go ahead and roll the second one.
Enjoy your extra big-ass fries.
You didn't give me no fries. I got an empty box.
Would you like another?
Extra big-ass fries.
I said I didn't get any.
Thank you. Your account has been charged. Your balance is 0. Please
What?
come back when you can afford to make a purchase.
No.
I'm sorry you're having
Come
trouble.
on. My kids
sorry
are
you're
starving.
This should help you calm down. Please come back when you can afford to make a purchase. Your kids are starving. Carl's Jr. believes no child should go hungry. You are an unfit mother. Your children will be placed in the custody of Carl's Jr. Carl's Jr. Fuck you. I'm eating. Welcome to Carl's Jr. Would you like to try our
Extra big-ass taco.
now with more
Molecules.
All right. If you were to say, Mark, that if you only had to play one clip to explain what the singularity is, that Carl's Jr. I think explains everything exactly, because it's accurate, it's real, and I see that happening sooner than later. Yeah. But the only thing what really got me thinking, and I don't know if this is even a question, but the singularity concept started from this von Neumann, who is creating the first atomic bomb. There's something frightening about that alone, because with what he was dealing with the end result of destroying mankind, yet it's leading into there's something that, again, I don't know where this is going, but I see that directly related to just ordering French fries from a machine. So I don't know.
That's right. So she and her children went hungry that night. That's not good, but there are a lot more vital things that go on that are impacted by these systems. And so, and also in the development side of things. So it costs us billions of dollars during development because of the way that we approach things. We'll talk about that a little bit later. it costs us decades of time, and then the capability that we're missing during all that development time where we're failing, we don't have that capability. Some of these capabilities are life and death. They're vital capabilities. So
that's where you're scaring me, because if I'm at a fast food restaurant and I'm mad because the thing's not, kind of like the Carl's Jr., it's not in putting my stuff together.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm worried about that, but I should be really worried about flying that airplane because if it's true for that, it's true for everything else. Is kind of what.
Yeah, and it has affected airplanes, and so we'll talk about that a little bit too. So in these cases, you have a situation where you're very frustrated with a comically failing system. You know that it's failing. What if you didn't know that it was failing? So I'll tell you a story about a situation like that. So there was this group of analysts worked for a particular organization, and these analysts had a number of databases they work with, and this one particular database was very important. They noticed that there were duplicates and triplicates and so forth of certain events, and the records were identical. So they thought, can this possibly be right, that the same event happened exactly the same way multiple times? Nothing was written down about this, and the database wasn't designed properly, which is another factor that enters into this. We have an attitude that, well, Joe's not doing anything. We need a database design. Joe can do it. It's like, anybody can do that. But not necessarily. Whenever I get to see the inside of a database, more often than not, there's design problems with it. So anyway, so they had no design information about this, and the design was wrong. So they relied on word of mouth. They asked around, who's the expert on this? That expert didn't know. But that expert said, well, you might ask so-and-so. They're even more of an expert than I am. And that expert didn't know. And so on and so forth, until they got to the end of the line, kind of a heart of darkness kind of thing, if you've ever heard of that story. And then they thought, well, somebody must know this. Maybe people know bits and pieces. We're going to get multiple people together, all the experts in one room, and we'll find the answer. And this is one of those super systems, because the data was flowing not only within the organization in question, but coming from multiple organizations and going through them being processed. So they got all these experts in one room. They asked the question, they had the discussion, and guess what? Even all together, they did not know why. So if they did know, then they could say, oh, these are errors, or these are not errors, and then they would correct them. But they couldn't. You can't correct the errors. And so you have a triplicate, you're off by 300%. If this is important information, people are going to be making decisions based on it. You can imagine the impact of being off by 300%. So when you're dealing with information from some source that is assumed to be a reliable source, or maybe it's an official source, whatever source that you depend on, it may not be accurate.
How do you even fix that? Like in that example, when nobody knows, when you have all the experts in the room, nobody knows anything. How do you even begin to fix it?
You'd have to rebuild the system.
Wow.
And do it in the right way, and we'll talk about what the right way is. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Okay, so one thing that I've been hinting at here so far is the lack of documentation. Can you put that slide up there? There we go. So for thousands of years, the human race has become more advanced by becoming more literate. And that has been the case until just recently. So we've surprisingly entered into this post-literate era. And sure, we still read and write a lot on social media and things like that, usually about things that are not important. But when it comes to things that are really important, that really affect us, that are in our engineering or what should be engineering, we don't write about them. And writing, documenting either in meaningful diagrams or just plain old English is part of the engineering process. So we're not engineering, and that is part of the problem, and also will take us to part of the solution.
So part of this is what you're saying is part of this issue of the Carl's Jr. is just, I kind of think of my dad. Write it down. A lot of this is just because people are not archiving, they're not writing, they're not documenting. Is that part of the issue?
Yeah, and the way this came about was, and now I'm going to be talking some heresy here. So for those in the software business, be prepared for that.
We like to talk controversy. This is good.
So currently, one of the practices is something called DevSecOps, which is development, security, and operations. And a predecessor to that was Agile, and there's still a lot of talk about Agile. But Agile is really the issue, so I'm going to talk about that. So in Agile, it contrasts itself with something called waterfall. Do we have the waterfall slide here somewhere?
Might be the next one, Jonathan. Nope. Let's imagine a waterfall.
All right. I'm jumping ahead too far. So anyway, so there are some myths about this whole thing. So in the Agile dogma, there's the idea that there was a thing called waterfall, where you have a series of stages. You're actually planning things out. You're documenting everything as you go along. You're designing, you're engineering. And this is now considered to be a horrible thing. And it never really was the case. So Agile, by comparison, as you're going along, there's certain procedures and techniques and so forth that I won't go into. But the main thing about Agile is, as you're going along, if you realize, oh, we could have done this better, let's add this design feature, or there was something that we left out of the design, whatever, then you can make these changes along the way. So this has combined with a societal tendency, which is a tendency to have job security by not sharing information, either the data itself or the design information. So if I build something, I don't document it, or if I did partially document it, if I don't share that design with other people, I feel like, well, nobody can fire me now because they'll be without this information. I say I don't mean me personally. That would go against my personal principles. But that's very common. So what we need to do culturally is we need to reverse this and make it so that if people do not share information, if they do not design things, if they do not share those designs, then they should be concerned about their job security. So it's a combination of a cultural factor with the introduction of Agile. And now I'm not saying that Agile or DevSecOps is inherently bad. What I'm saying is the way that it has been practiced resulted in building things without engineering. And if we were to, and it's the only area of engineering where we don't do engineering.
Are you, because you're saying a lot here, and I know for people that are our age or older, there's probably a lot of COBOL programmers out there, probably with a big smile on their face, because you're probably just living the dream and collecting big fat checks because it's such an old system. So I understand this documentation, like for these like enterprise or legacy systems, but you're saying, so the waterfall, which I come from this Agile world, like waterfall's bad, Agile Scrum is all good. But isn't documentation a key part of the Agile, or is it just that people just don't, they just create, they just don't even worry about that?
Well, that's the thing. It's possible to continue to do engineering with Agile, but because of a tendency towards job security and also probably a degree of laziness as well. Hey, if Agile means that I don't have to document anything, that I'm just going ahead without it, I'm going to just skip that step. It doesn't save time, though, because it takes a lot more time to reverse engineer things than it does to document them in the first place. So both of the stories that I told, like the decommissioning story, in that case, that could have been decommissioned very quickly. So most of a year was wasted reverse engineering this thing that we wanted to decommission. And if it was documented, we could have decommissioned it very quickly and got on with things.
This might sound weird coming out of left field, but do you think there's a big cultural piece within the software development about this? Because somebody told me once, and I can't dispute this, and this will be good to see what your thoughts are. They said that the term legacy, like when you think of like software development legacy systems,
Mhm.
he said that the only industry where legacy is a bad thing is in software. And I'm like, and I think they're right, because when you think of like, multi-generational families, legacy is important. It's who you are, legacy of for people or for things or for buildings. When you think of software, it's like, oh, it's bad. That means it's, and I'm wondering if that's all part of this to play with this culture of like, no, you got to keep creating, and if it's an old, you don't document it, you just move on. I'm not sure if that's making sense, but it's something that's always in the back of my head when you think of legacy systems. It's like, oh, it's in software, it's bad.
Well, yeah, software is connected to data science, because data science is the science, the principles behind these data systems. And so there's that connection. And
to me, it's all the same.
What's that?
To me, it's all the same. Software data.
It's very tightly interrelated. And so one of the misconceptions in data science currently, what I call first generation data science, is the idea of new and old. So when we're dealing with technology,
and are we in the first generation right now?
Yeah, we're still in first generation in most organizations. Yeah,
I like the term.
We need to get to something called next generation, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So in most areas of technology, old is bad and new is good. But data science is a little bit different, because data science is like a hybrid between engineering and mathematics. So you think of a mathematical theorem like Pythagorean theorem, 1,000 years from now, it's still going to be valid, right? So there's certain things, certain principles in data science, just like physical science or mathematics, it's not going to change. Whereas if you're in networks or something like that, the hardware is going to be totally different. So we have to realize what is not going to change, what shouldn't change, and what will change, and understand the difference between old and new. So with Agile, here's where some of that confusion comes in. People think that Agile is new. Agile is not new. We didn't call it Agile originally. But if we realize that, oh, this plane is missing a wing, we have to change the design. They've always done that. Known as the waterfall thing was kind of invented as a way that we used to do things that we never really did. And the other thing, which is almost comical about it, is that when you have a major program which is floundering, a committee will be put together, and then that committee will study, all right, what went wrong and what do we got to do? The conclusion is almost always, we have to do Agile. There's only one problem with that, and that is they were already doing Agile when they failed. So obviously, that's not the solution. What they need to do is to start doing some engineering with their Agile.
Well, there's a lot of Agile developers that are probably grinding their teeth right now. So
yeah, there will be some pulling of hair and gnashing of teeth.
And if you are, make some comments. Let's this is your time. This is your time to fight back. So just because I know I was a big fan of Agile, but I never really got to use it more. I use it more in the innovation space, not so much in the software.
Yeah. We see a comment here by John Alberg, and he's saying, how can you clean up old data? For traditional data storage, there are files and folders, and people can find it fairly easily and determine to delete it or keep. How would that work with AI? Similarly, how can AI deal with data retention needs? Often companies need to delete older data for compliance reasons. Well, I don't know that you really would use AI for that. So, you're talking about retention schedules. And this is something that the National Archives has worked on long before there were computers. And so your different categories of data, you have a disposition for each of those, which says, okay, after so many years, this type of data goes to archive, this type of data gets destroyed, maybe it goes to archive first and then it gets destroyed and so forth. So it's really based on a schedule, exactly what happens to old data, because eventually you run out of room to keep data. And there may be some data that we attempt to keep forever as long as possible.
He brought up an interesting question with compliance. With this lack of archiving data, wouldn't compliance be a great way to get people to do you find it in industries where there is compliance that 25% of not knowing where the data is much
compliance in the organizations that I've been in contact with? Compliance and data is very low. So you may create a policy and say everyone's going to do X, but there's only a couple ways to gain compliance. One is to create something that's so great that they'll abandon the other thing that they were. Say the policy is you're going to work with this system instead of the other system. Your new system just has to be so great that people want to just use that one instead. The other is funding. So do not pass go, do not collect $200 unless you follow such and such policy. People love funding, even if it's not money in their own personal pocket. If it's coming to their division for their work, they love money. And you have to have the guts to tie your policy to money. Otherwise, people do not follow data strategy policy much. I think you need to have that strategy, but you should expect there to be a lack of compliance.
I got it.
So if you wanted to have engineering, for instance, you would say, okay, you're not going to get paid unless you produce the design information. And organizations, companies, they hire other organizations and companies to build things for them, right? You absolutely must make sure that in your contract, you are requiring design documentation for what it is that they're going to build for you. And you have to know how to word that in order to get what it is that you're paying for. What are you paying for? A common idea is that we're paying for the executable, the software that we're going to run. Actually, you're not paying for the executable. The executable is worth almost nothing. What you're paying for is intellectual property, which consists of the source code as well as the design documentation. You're paying for intellectual property. And many customers do not get what they paid for. And then they end up with these black boxes on account of it. So contracts, very important. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, well, we have another one here. Rich is saying the problem with AI technology is that when it receives the information that it seeks for the user, if not trained on what that and on what to do with that data policy, especially in law enforcement. Yeah, so with law enforcement, there's a lot of talk about military. Should these systems be autonomous and be able to take action on their own without humans in the loop? This has been a concern. We talked about this in the last Salon. And so having a human in the loop is very important. However, if you have competition, say in a military situation, one country removes that particular constraint, the other one's going to be able to move much faster in terms of the response of their weapon systems. And so all countries are going to end up removing those constraints. And so we need to make sure that our systems are and our AI are very competent in terms of what they're doing. Okay, so let's talk about how science progresses, because we want to talk about how we can progress with data science in this context. So I'll give an example from astronomy. A long time ago, people believed in the Ptolemaic system of the solar system, Ptolemaic model. The Ptolemaic model, the Earth is at the center, the sun and the planets revolve around the Earth. Next slide. The problem with that model was that the observations, even though it seems at first sight that this is exactly what's happening, that things are revolving around the Earth, we see them rising and setting, going around. But when you make accurate observations, you find that they're not moving on an orbit around us, just not following a single elliptical or circular path. And so to make a correction for that, to adjust, what they did is they added epicycles. So as the thing that's orbiting around the Earth does so, it also revolves around a point in its orbit. And that wasn't exactly accurate either, although it improved the accuracy. And so they added epicycles to the epicycles. And if you added an infinite number of epicycles, you might get to an accurate representation of what you observe. So next slide. So as you're probably aware, a fellow by the name of Copernicus in the 1500s came up with the heliocentric model of the solar system, which is the accurate model, did away for the need of the epicycles and all that. And it was very controversial. And in fact, in 1616, it was banned by the Pope. So this, even though it was correct, it was very, very controversial. It was heretical. And so the word revolution today, which is used in technology, we say that a certain technology is revolutionary. We say that political groups who are overthrowing government, call them revolutionaries and so forth. This disruptive change is called a revolution, and it's called a revolution because of Copernicus and his model, which described these revolutions. So you may already be familiar with that, but if not, interesting thing to contemplate whenever you hear somebody talking about revolution or revolutionary. Okay, next slide. All right, well, what does this have to do with data science? Well, we have models in data science. Let's see how accurate those are. Probably the most common model, and you see it in a lot of organizations' data strategies. And if you are in one of those organizations that has a data strategy, you're probably familiar with this. It's called the data lifecycle. So take a look at the one on the left. It's one of the simpler models. And this particular one, it starts out with creating data. And then after you create data, that triggers your next step, which is to store the data, which then triggers the next step, which is to use the data, share the data, archive the data, destroy the data, and then create new data. There's a couple problems with this. First of all, this isn't the way that we do things, and nor is it the way that we should do things. These different events don't cover all the things that we do with data, and the one event, the one task doesn't occur upon the completion of the previous one. And so this sequential part of the model is not accurate. For instance, you're not always going to store the data after you use the data, or any of these steps. They don't follow the sequence in a strict pattern. The other thing is that it's not a cycle. So you don't create data after you destroy data. That isn't the thing that triggers the creation of data. So you may create it on a schedule, or you may not create it at all. You may be collecting the data. You may do it on a schedule. You may do it in response to some external event. Oh, we need information about X. Let's go get it. And so it's not a cycle, but psychologically, humans seem to be very attracted to this idea of cycle models. And I see a lot of cycle models out there, and many of them are not actually cycles. So there's two kinds of data science and corresponding data management out there today. There's first generation and there's next generation. So one thing that characterizes first generation is that if you have a bad model, if you have a practice which has no real explanation behind it, why are we doing X? Like we're separating two different types of data instead of integrating them together. Someone will come up with that idea, and then other people go, well, I don't know why we're doing it, and the model's not right, but it's good enough. So in a nutshell, I would say that there's an attitude of good enough. What we need to have in data science is more of a perfectionist approach. We're not going to accept inaccurate models. We're not going to accept inaccurate data. Every model has to be accurate. Every practice has to be a best practice, and it has to have a reason behind it. So it's further evidence of the fact that these models are inaccurate. You'll see a lot of them as an experiment. Go online and do a search on data lifecycle, and you'll have scores of these things pop up, and they're all different. You've got the one on the top middle there. You've got cycles inside the cycles. What does that even mean diagrammatically? Sometimes they jump across. You got something in the middle. And that one in the center bottom is very interesting because it has epicycles in it. So, yeah. So first generation is like Ptolemaic astronomy.
Now, are you saying all these data models right now are all first generation? Are there any that?
Yeah, everything on the screen here is first generation. So in next generation, we have accurate models of things. So, and we actually don't start with the data. We actually start with the people. So ultimately, it's real world effects that you want to manage with your data. And there are people that are going to make these things happen. And there are people using the data. And so what are the activities that these people are carrying out? And what do they need in order to carry out their mission successfully? And that's what we need to model. And then when we model that, and if we model it accurately, then we know what we need to do for them. And that's the theoretical foundation behind next generation data management.
Is there a popular model that you consider second generation?
Yeah. Do we have the user model? I think we do. I think we have the active user model in here, Jonathan. Is that on the next slide? No, we'll come to that. We'll come back to that. Okay. Go back to the one with the FBI. Okay, so we're gonna get to those models, Arthur. But before that, some of the other recent events which show the importance of good data science. So you're probably familiar with an event that happened at a golf course down in Florida not too long ago with an attempted assassination. Well, the would-be assassin was in place 12, 13 hours prior to being spotted. Did we know he was there? Well, everyone in this salon right now is being tracked. Most of you anyway. There's various ways that people can be tracked. So he was being tracked. And we know that he was being tracked in particular because his track was produced after the fact. Why would we want to pay particular attention to his track? Maybe we can't pay attention to everybody's track in the world. Well, he wrote a book in which he espoused assassination. He was also convicted of possessing a weapon of mass destruction. And so it makes sense that his track would be monitored. And then also, so Detective Rich is saying leakage. Yeah, so that's another thing that came up with regards to this situation. Why did the assassin know that the protectee was going to be at that golf course that day? All right, so there had to be some information leak as well. But anyway, now the Secret Service also knows where its protectees are, right? So it wouldn't be too complicated, really, to take the tracks of potential assassins and the tracks of the protectees, to monitor those in a computer program. And whenever they start converging, you know that you got to go to location X and intercept that assassin. In this case, it would have been before he even got to the golf course, right? But that didn't happen. So what does that tell you? It tells you that they didn't have such a system, or if they did, it wasn't working. All right, let's see the next slide. So let's talk about 9/11. So as you all know, 9/11 was a surprise attack on the United States. Or was it? Turns out that we knew a lot about 9/11 before it occurred. President Clinton was briefed on it, and President Bush was briefed on it. National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice was briefed on it. It was known that it was going to involve aircraft. The FBI knew about it, and the CIA knew about it, and the intelligence agencies felt that it wasn't a matter for the FBI, and so there was a lack of communication. The FBI was notified about strange behavior and questions from flight instructor school students. We were notified by the head of the Northern Alliance that an attack was imminent. He notified the European Union about that, and he was assassinated 2 days before 9/11. We knew what the name of the operation was. It was the Big Wedding. We had information predicting the attack from multiple foreign intelligence agencies. And so with all of that, we have to conclude that we did know that 9/11 was coming. On the other hand, we didn't do anything about this very important attack, which indicates that we didn't know. Okay, so like the case of the epicycles, science progresses when we find an anomaly. So this is clearly an anomaly that we knew and we didn't know at the same time. So there must be something wrong with our theory of knowing. Next slide. And what's wrong with our theory of knowing is that there aren't just two levels of knowing. So in first generation, you either know something or you don't know it. But really, there's 4 levels of knowing, and of course, not knowing. So the first level is having the data. So we were at level 1 knowing prior to 9/11. We had the data, we had a lot of data. But did we know we had the data? The data wasn't being shared between all of the various entities. So there was no one person who knew all of the things that the other people knew. And so they didn't know what information they had overall. That if they did, we would have been at level 2, which is knowing you have the data. And in next generation, there are ways to make that happen. In fact, the whole purpose of next generation is to get you to level 4. Level 3 is understanding the data. So imagine you have a database that's got a date, for instance. It's a date of what? What's the time zone? Analysts want to understand what the data is. And for that, you have to understand the data systems. By the time my data has gotten to me, it's gone through multiple databases. It's gone through multiple processing steps. It is based on original data collected from the real world. What is all that? I don't understand the data unless I know all of that, right? So we have to understand our data. And then the fourth, the highest level, the level that we need to be at is level 4, gaining insights by having data in the context of other data. And that's why one of the primary best practices in next generation data management is data integration. And to gain data integration, you need to have well-engineered system integration.
Right. I want to pause for a second because you just, there's a lot of stuff going on here that I'm still wrapping my head around. Because I would say that the average person would assumes that, oh yeah, everything should be level 4.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that there's a black box, which so, and I want to bring in a guest because for Jonathan, the chat's not working on here because I wanted to bring in somebody who might have a question that's doing a project related to this 4 levels of knowledge, or this next generation 4 levels of knowing. But so are you saying that in general, people or industries or organizations are operating without even this knowledge? They're just at 0 or 1?
A lot of them are at level 1. Some of them have a toehold in level 2 or level 3. So what you need to get to level 2 is something called the data catalog. And what you need to get to level 3 is something called the data dictionary. So
there's a path progression. Jonathan, is Rich there? Is he in the green room? Because I have no visibility. Can we bring Rich in? So,
Rich.
So Mark,
Hi.
This is Rich Wostocki. So he's actually a TEDx Naperville alumni speaker, and I want him to share a quick story and to have a conversation with you, Mark, because hopefully I'm right on this, because it sounds like, Rich, you've gone through this. You're doing something right now with this whole 4 levels of knowledge.
It's the same methodology. So I was a police detective for 30 years at Naperville, Illinois. I had to retire after I did a TED Talk because I was never at work anymore when it went viral. so now I train about 300,000. I train about 300,000 students across the country. I was a cyber crimes detective in Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. And so the United States Secret Service put out the 2021 Threat Assessment Survey Study. And what they found was that 93% of the school shooters over the last 12 years posted online what they wanted to do before they did it.
Yeah.
And the problem is with this leakage, nobody was talking to each other. So what I did was I put together, and I'm the cyber trainer for the National Association of School Resource Officers. I train about 4,000 SROs a year in this stuff. So the class is entitled Identifying and Intercepting School Violence Through Leakage and Cyber Investigations. So what I did was, according to the ECPA, the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, which was born in 1986, it says that if death or great bodily harm is about to happen or happening now, law enforcement can invoke exigent circumstance and get the information within an hour from any online company. So when a threat comes in, what happens is it starts with the students, right? So I had the students not telling anybody that someone's going to bring a gun to school or thinking about shooting up the school. I had administrators not knowing what to get from the student. They just tell them, just report it to the abuse section. And then I have law enforcement who have no idea on how to do cyber investigations, right? Mm-hmm. And then the fourth, the social networks and gaming platforms, when a threat comes through, that AI program sends it right to the FBI. Well, the United States U.S. Prosecutor's Office never will do a search warrant on a juvenile, and the FBI can never arrest a juvenile because they don't have a mechanism to arrest children. So they leave it up to the locals, right? Mm-hmm. So what I did was I knew that I had to show kids the whole saying of, if you see something, say something, right? Mm-hmm. That's not good enough. We have to see something, say something, and show kids how to report something, right? So there's 5 things that kids have to report. And then you have to train the administrators and law enforcement SROs to work together, because the big failure is that school officials were not telling their school resource officers. Like the first question I ask in class is that how many of you resource officers are sick and tired of your administration not only calling you when things go sideways? And I get half of them raising their hands. So what I tell the school administrators, and these are the IT people, the social workers, the deans, the principals, and superintendents, if you continue to allow this to happen, you're going to get kids killed. Mm-hmm. So I really sent a shocker to them. Like they need to really pay attention because they think they can handle it themselves, and they can't. So then I show law enforcement how to obtain and use eCPA. And then within 1 hour, they are able to obtain the data to go after the student who made that threat. And the main priority of this class is to give that student the mental health help they need before the shooting starts. Now, let's look at what happened in Georgia last month, right?
So in a nutshell, Rich, just
that
to clarify,
kid,
I know you live this and Mark lives this and I don't. You're kind of taking this next generation 4 levels of knowing, and this is kind of high level version of your process. And a very specific an example with the school shootings.
Yeah, I think it's a great example, and it brings in a couple other factors. So one are the legalities that you mentioned that can get in the way. The other is that these data systems are part of workflows. Part of them involve computer data systems, but also humans are part of their processing nodes essentially, and they have a role to play too. So human error, human apathy, so forth. And also, getting back to engineering, I see a lot of workflows that are not engineered. Workflows have to be engineered. Like, okay, if somebody dropped the ball over here, then there should be an alert on that. Well, where are we with this process? Oh, it's sitting on so-and-so's desk when there's about to be a school shooter come in.
Yep. And last year with this methodology, we stopped 55 school shootings.
Wow.
This year, as of this morning, we stopped 24.
Wow.
We made 24 arrests in the second month of school with the officers that take in the class.
Well, that shows the impact of this. I think a lot of folks who haven't thought about this, they might view, and also people who are overseeing and funding data programs, for instance, they might think, well, what are we going to get out of this? It'll be like maybe a 10% tweak on performance or something. No, these are life and death situations.
How about saving kids?
Yeah, and even like things that change the course of history in some cases.
Yeah,
this is how important it is.
But here's what upsets me about the whole thing. This past year, I wanted to share my data and my evidence-based process with 75 senators and congressmen. I sent them their legislative people, their press people, all the information that they needed. And I got a return call from one person, and that was Dick Durbin, I'm his, I live in Chicago, so I'm his constituent. He writes me back and proceeds to tell me, thank you for your service. I appreciate what you're doing, but what you're doing isn't going to solve it. It's about gun control.
Oh my God, that's unbelievable.
Like, you have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Here I have a program that I want to bring to Washington. I want to sit with congressmen and senators, and I want to show them how we can do that. All we need to do is have the funding to do it and show and make it a mandatory thing that we have to be training our students, we have to be training our school staff, and we have to give law enforcement this such needed training, because I have proven that we can stop school shooters. And it's all about mental health.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times people will say, well, we can't do anything about this or that because of the law, the way it currently is. But laws can be changed. So we need to get beyond that. We need to fix things in terms of technology. We need to fix things in terms of the culture, and we need to change the laws.
Is that a big problem, Mark? I know we might be jumping ahead. Is the people issue, like in the regulation or governance, is that a big? There's multiple challenges. Is that a big problem or big?
Yeah. If you go to any CDO conference, you will find a consensus among them that culture is probably number one, even more so than technical capability.
Interesting. And to summarize this next generation 4 levels of knowing, is this a common framework, or is this something that you created? What is this?
This is something that I published in 2022 in a book called Next Generation Data Management.
I like it. I mean, this needs to be something that McKinsey can take from you and then charge $100,000 to show people.
Yeah, so we'll just be scratching the surface on this, and I'm really thrilled that Rich is doing this. So there's a zeitgeist. People, if there's something where the time has come for something, it will be discovered in little pockets here and there, and hopefully it will gain enough sunshine that it will become generally known because there's just so much at stake.
Yeah, I mean, what I did was I took all of my child exploitation online experience. I've arrested over 300 predators. And I took that and I brought it into the school system. And it's just amazes me that how when people think of cyber investigations, they automatically think of child exploitation. They don't realize that it's the leakage, it's the mental health. If we want to find something out about a kid, we just do a search warrant on their social media. We find their deepest, darkest secrets. And that's where we find their intent to do harm. And so I've been so defeated by politicians that don't want to hear my cries. And when we go into funding, there's billions of dollars for this funding, but the federal government makes it so hard for my schools to go after it, to write a grant for it. Nobody puts in for it because it's too time consuming. And there's billions of dollars sitting there just to fund these programs.
This might be a good use case, and then hopefully, you guys, I'll connect you guys after this because you guys connect. This might be a nice little use case to use because it's a passionate and very very real solution.
Yeah, maybe we can join forces on this, Rich.
Yeah,
absolutely. If you wanted to,
so we got a bunch of other stuff to cover. Maybe we should continue on and we can blend the 4 levels and examples in with it.
Absolutely. And if anybody's listening, if they want to Google Caliber Press, We Can Stop School Shootings, I published an article on it from start to finish. When that got published, NBC did an investigation on me to see, is this some crazy detective like talking out of the side of his neck? And then they interviewed some of the detectives that have been to my class. They interviewed chiefs. They interviewed people on my social media, and they're like, this is the real deal.
Well, weren't you just on Dr. Phil?
I was just on Dr. Phil, and that's
so Rich, some of that information, I'll make sure I put it into the detailed show notes. For people watching.
Dr. Phil was even amazed. He goes, "How many arrests did you make in the first month of school?" I said 22. He goes, "We need to be talking more about this." So that's even more to come on that. But I mean, I guess the only way to get it out there is to do it through media.
Yeah. All right, Rich. We're gonna cut you loose because I know that you're passionate about this, but send me the information and let's follow up. Let's get that in the show notes.
I will.
And thanks for jumping in. And so still take part in the chats for the questions too. Yeah, I want to bring him because I think that's just a great example where maybe I'll let you get back on track, but maybe the solution is for people. Again, everything starts at the local level, boots on the ground. And if enough people or organizations or schools say, hey, we can start with one elementary school, let's implement this program. Maybe that's the momentum that the data science world needs to start for having people to take this serious. Because I know when you mentioned like go to any CDO conference, I'm like cringing. I'm like, oh my God, I can't imagine what that would be like because I don't, it's a different world, but something that's relatable for people to latch onto these concepts. Kids, school shootings. I mean,
this affects everyone, and I think people can speak up and say, "Hey, we have this information. Why aren't you using it?" So, in the case of school shootings, it's always presented like, "Gee, that was a total surprise to us." And then a couple weeks later, we find out the bulk of the information that we had about this school shooter, and they were level 1 knowing. They knew, and they just dug their heels in and never got to level 4.
Yeah, I just love this model, and then I'm going to follow up with you later on it. I just love stuff like this. I live for these models. It's my passion, but this one's wild. Or sorry, so I want to get you back on track, but
let's go to the next slide.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
All right, so wrapping up the discussion on the software, this is another area where AI comes in. So we have a talent shortage in the sense that there's more and more technology all the time. When you're having some problem with your data system, you call somebody up, you say, my thing's broken. They give you a workaround, right? Why? Because you're not talking to the engineer that made it. You're talking to somebody on the other side of the planet who doesn't know much about it, says, turn it off, turn it back on, here's the workaround, whatever. Only 4% of the population has the potential for working in these technical fields. And that's not going to change with retraining or anything like that. It's a matter of aptitude. So with the shortage of people, we need to look towards AI to very strategically leverage the talent that we have. So if you look at a pipeline of software development, like shown here, the design portion, which is currently being left off in most cases, And an excuse might be, well, we don't have time, whatever. Well, you can get more time because AI is on the cusp of being able to read code, to read that software and give a English language description of what's going on there, what it's doing. This would be very helpful to leverage the documentation effort. Then, of course, there's the actual development, which is that bit in the middle. And we have a increasing percentage of software which is written by AI. Now, a lot of this isn't 100% bug-free or correct or whatever, but it gives programmers a head start on things. So we can develop software a lot faster in that regard. Perhaps freeing up people to do some of this more engineering work that's being left out. And then finally, there's the testing. Thinking back to the idiocracy case and many other cases that you experience all the time, there's a lot of bugs in software. Many of them don't get attended to. You have a thing with a certain company, I won't name companies, but okay, you know, we've found a bug. Do you want to report this? Well, does it ever get reported? Does it ever get worked on? Very often, these bugs are just something that randomly gets overwritten eventually with all the many DevSecOps releases. So the number of releases is the metric of success, but what's the quality of those releases? That seems to be ignored. So in testing, which is the field that I work in currently from the data perspective, it's very difficult to test software that has millions of different states. So what I mean by a state is that if you have different variables, say you're doing word processing, like the particular characters in every line of your text is part of a state that the thing is in. What menu are you working? What window is up? There's literally millions of different states that a piece of software can find itself in. And a human is too slow to go through all these different states. But what a human can do is they can recognize when they're in a failed state. So since we can't properly test software, usually what you end up doing, and you all have experienced this, close it down and go back to the beginning and start it up again. What are you doing? You're going to the start state. You're in some failed state. No one ever tracks that down. No one ever figures out the fact that this was a bug, what caused it. It's just beyond our ability to deal with it. Partly because we didn't document, partly because there's so many states. So as that AI gets sophisticated enough that it can recognize a fail state as well as go through millions of states, we can make our software much more reliable and bug-free.
But could just brute force computing power take care of most of for testing, or is the AI that critical to that piece?
It's critical for that piece because you don't even need AI. Just conventional software, test software can take a piece of software that's being tested. It can take it through millions of different states. That's not a problem at all. But when you're in a state that's a bug state, how do you recognize that it is a bug or failed state? Right. That's more in line with human intelligence. But as AI improves, once we can recognize that a bug is occurring, then we can turn more of the testing process over to AI.
And is this what you'd consider like a next gen model, data science model?
This is outside of next gen. This is more on the software side of it.
And is this where, for my own benefit, is this where the traditional agile person would start in the middle and they just don't do the
Yeah, that's right. They
okay,
start in
so
the middle.
that's how you get better understanding.
Testing. In fact, I know they don't do much review in many cases because if you look at the user interface, even never mind what's behind the scenes, if you look at the user interface, there are so many design flaws that I often look at these things and say, did anyone even give this a cursory look at all to see whether the design of the user interface was correct? How many decades have we been doing this and we don't know basic user interface design principles?
And I think that's where the average person understands that piece, because if you've ever, like the Norman door, if you've ever tried to open a door and it's a push and you're pulling at it, that's not your fault. That's a design fault.
Yeah.
And the same thing for software. Your phone, every time an iPhone does an update, I'm like, where's the photos? I can't find it. That's good. The good news, it's not my fault.
Yeah, and that's something you don't have to be a technical expert to recognize some of these design flaws. If you're using some software and you can't figure out, like, how do I do such and such an operation? If you have to go to YouTube video to learn from somebody who's reverse engineered it, then it wasn't designed right.
Well, good. All right, this is making a lot more sense, at least for me.
All right, let's go to the next slide. I think you have a slide in there from our previous salon.
That's the AI overlord just throwing their reminding you that who's in control.
Like Jonathan, you may have entirely the wrong deck. We need the first generation deck.
I thought I had the right deck. What slide do you need?
Well, let me see. I'm going to pull it up on my.
Yeah, can you?
Pulling up.
I thought I had the right one.
Yeah, there should be a slide with the user model on it. It's got some rectangles and arrows.
That was
and
the arrow. Okay.
And there's another slide with a woman with her mouth open and a camera and so forth. You have that?
This one?
No. This is the AI deck. This is the wrong deck.
This is a good time for those watching live. If you want to get a drink, go to the bathroom, get something to eat, stretch your legs. Now's the time to do it.
So, I don't feel like I've got the right file.
I'm looking to see if I can.
Sorry, I'm just opening up some files here.
So Mark, what was the next slide about? Why he's looking for it?
It is look in your email. You get the date here, November 5th.
Okay. But what was the concept that's about?
Well, it's entirely, he's got to get the right deck. So the November 5th, 9:21 a.m. That's the email. It has the first generation Singularity PowerPoint in it.
I'm gonna be able to do some little tricks here with my setup here. Is this the image you're looking for?
I'll send it again.
I got it. I just
Okay.
I'm just having to get it onto the computer. Sorry about that.
With this data science, what is there an organization that, from the consumer perspective, that does a good job? That's like, hey, if you want to see a good example, like I would argue that if Apple is probably a decent job of user interface and for data because the stuff works and it's intuitive. Is there any companies that have like a gold standard for they handle, or you're not, or should you not say that?
Well, I don't want to name any companies, but I'll give an example of an anonymous company and their different parts, right? So there's one company that's known for mail order, and the website that is, or the web app which is used to order things is superb. But they have other web apps for, say, authors of books or people who are selling things, which are very poorly designed. So that seems to vary by the team. So the team that's doing an excellent job, the one that as the customer interaction site. I don't know what kind of principles or policies they follow. Maybe they design things. Maybe they are just so talented that they don't, and they have a bunch of other engineers that have to come in and reverse engineer what they've done. So I don't actually know what's going on inside that organization, but it's like the car companies. People might be very enamored of a particular company that makes cars, but really what matters is who are the engineers that made this car within the same company versus another car within the same company, which could be a lemon, and the first one might have been a fantastic car. So
it's funny you mention that.
The team makes a big difference.
I just got I bought a used Tesla just yesterday, and I went to some dealers last weekend, and I can't stand the business model for dealers. I even know how to deal with it. I still can't stand it. And if people don't know, the Tesla, you order on your phone, and you take a picture of your driver's license. You take a picture. So we talk about data science and handling the data. You take a picture of your insurance. You go to the dealer. You press your button. You're here. They show up with a little table that has your name on it. It says welcome. Like, hey, here's your 4 pieces of paper to sign within 3 minutes. 1, 2, 3, 4. They walk you out. There's a card. It's got a little placard. It has your name on it. Done. I'm like, that's it. I mean, it took 5-10 minutes.
Yeah, sometimes you run into something that works really well. So I'm not saying that everything's broken. There's some, or you look at your GPS. Occasionally, it'll send you on a wild goose chase. But what can be done with GPS on cell phones today? Those applications are fantastic as well. They'll even allow you to navigate through parking lots and things like that.
So a little off-topic question. So when you're talking about this 4 levels of knowledge and this second generation of data,
mm-hmm.
do you take into account? And here the GPS is a good example. Is it in your models or in the process, or like at the CDO conferences? Are there these discussions like, okay, what happens if the GPS is taken away? It no longer works. Is that part of an engineering issue where that's taken into account? Like, what if this data set's missing, or is that part of the conversation, or is that more like, well, we don't assume that's going to happen, so.
Well, I haven't been inside those exact teams, but I would imagine that they're just hoping it doesn't happen. So people are probably familiar with CrowdStrike.
Yeah.
And, that's an example of what can happen with the failed system. Okay, good. You got the right deck. Okay, let's go back a couple slides. One more. There you go. Stop right there. Okay, so I don't want to present any problems without also providing a solution. So this is a user model, one of the user models that I talked about earlier. We model what people do. So this was called the active user model. And what active users do, they're in the digging around inside these data systems, and they have to discover data. You see that on the top left. There's 2 streams because there's multiple data systems and data sources going on. Anyway, so they'll discover data. How do you do that? By using a data catalog. So there's methods to do that. And then they have to understand the data once they find it. Is this really the data that I want? How can I analyze it? And so forth. And to do that, you have a data dictionary. So the data dictionary describes the structure of the data, which can be somewhat complex. There's a whole theory behind that, at least when it comes to relational databases. And so you have to, both the analysts and the developers of those databases have to know that. And then there's data access, of course, controlling the access. And then there's the integration of the data. So again, number 1 best practice in next generation data management is data integration. That's the final process, which gets you to step 4, because just having data that isn't connected to other data has very little meaning as compared to data in the context of other data. So if Mr. Smith is on probation in Iowa, that doesn't sound that interesting. He's not allowed to leave the state. If Mr. Smith is in Missouri, that fact by itself is not very interesting, but those 2 facts together are interesting. So all of this leads up to analysis. So one of the things that you see in first gen very often is that there's a confusion between analysis and all of data science. Analysis is not all of data science. It's the last step of data science. And in terms of personnel, there's confusion. And so as organizations staff up, they have a problem because what they've done is taken their analysts, who are very important people, and they have just renamed them data scientists. So if all you're doing is analysis, you might be very good at it. You know SQL language, you know Python, whatever, super duper analyst. You're still an analyst unless you're doing some of these other things which occur before the analysis process. And then all the black things, especially the decide, the act, these are where we go back out into the physical world after being in the data world and actually make a difference. But what difference you're going to make, whether you make a difference or not, depends on that analysis, and all that analysis depends on all your other data science. Okay, so let's go to the next slide for the notified user model. So the case that Rich brought up, the case of the assassination and 9/11, all would have been helped or prevented if there was a working notification model. Now, in the notification model, the user is relatively passive. A lot of activity goes on in the system, and they are more the actors responding to it. But there is planning that has to occur in advance of any adverse event. First of all, you have to decide what are those events. Is it an assassination? Is it a terrorist attack? Is it a school shooting? Then you have to determine what are the combinations of predictive data values which tell us that one of these events is imminent, right? And so this is a role for artificial intelligence when it comes to actually implementing the working system, because this involves pattern recognition. And then we have to determine what will be done if such an event is imminent. And we have to determine who will take the action. So it's interesting that on the day of 9/11, certain individuals in the FBI were just at that point deciding some of the things that are on this slide. When the event is occurring, it's too late to decide any of these things that all have to be done in advance. Next slide. So once all those things are determined, they would be embedded in a system which works kind of like this. You would detect the predictive data value combinations, probably using artificial intelligence. That would allow you to predict the event. You would notify the actors. The actors confirm the receipt so that nothing gets dropped through the cracks, as often does happen, and then an action is executed. So in all these three very important examples that Rich and I have provided, if there was a working system like this, and it sounds like Rich does have such a working system which has been allowed to be used in certain cases, that we can prevent adverse effects from occurring using this. There's another user model that I'm not going to present now, but you should know about, especially if you work in military or disaster relief, something like that, perhaps large law enforcement organizations, and that is the command and control user model. So that's the most complex one, and I won't present it here, but I thought I would mention it. Okay. So just another example, since we can't go into all of next generation, just another thing to illustrate one of the other differences in terms of how things are modeled. In first generation, you hear this a lot. There's two types of data structure. There's structured data and there's unstructured data. Is that an accurate model? Well, by now you're probably catching on that no, it's not an accurate model. So what they mean by structured data is the kind of data which would be in a database. Think of a form that you fill out. You put your first name, you put your last name, you put your address, you put your phone number, whatever. Those are specific fields, and they're always the same on every copy of that form. That's sort of the way data is organized. It's a lot more complicated than that, but that's the gist of structure in a database. So what about speech? and written text. That in first gen is called unstructured. Is it really unstructured? No, it's not unstructured at all, because if it was unstructured, we wouldn't be able to understand each other. It has a structure, and the structure is syntactic. So there's a whole class of structured data, which is syntactic. It includes natural languages as well as computer languages. And also certain file formats, if people are familiar with XML, JSON, things like that. Those all have a syntax. It's not as specific as the database data. That's the specific category, top left there. But it is a structure. Then there is structure that comes from nature. So natural structure. Where do we get this? We get it with sensors. So it could be a sensor in a camera, it could be a microphone, it could be radar, it could be a thermometer with electronic transference capability. All of these things have structure. Again, first gen calls them unstructured data. They're not unstructured. They have structure, which comes from physics out in the real world. And then there is truly unstructured data, and cryptographers use it in creating encrypted messages. So collections of zeros and ones that are completely random, have no pattern to them whatsoever. That is the only real unstructured data. So it does exist, it has a purpose, but it's a term which is applied to things that actually do have structure. So just another example of the accurate versus inaccurate models. Okay, there's our waterfall.
Hey.
Missing before because we had the wrong slide deck. All right.
Showed up.
Next slide. Next slide. All right, so this is my conclusion slide. So what do we have to do? There are solutions at hand. We can start using better procedures. We can bring engineering back into software development, use that along with our Agile or our DevSecOps. Do that right, do more documentation, step out of this post-literate era that we find ourselves in, and we can start using more sophisticated data science. Get away from this Ptolemaic first generation data science and start using data science, which is more rigorous, more scientific, and more engineering oriented. And I think we will solve many of our problems.
How confident are you that with AI, with the exponential innovation of AI, that this will be starting to be adopted sooner than later?
I'm not very confident. So unless what we're talking about today becomes part of the greater consciousness among the technical community, I think that the first singularity will become an irreversible process. And it will only fuel greater chaos within the second singularity. We won't be able to deal with that either.
Okay, because I have so many questions, but I'm still trying to wrap my head around all this. Because you mentioned culture, like the biggest issue is a culture issue, and I tend to agree that it's, but because people don't try to change somebody, change yourself first. Then you find out that, oh my gosh, people really don't change. But Agile did take off, and it became a big movement. Do you see something like that happening with this engineering push, with leveraging AI for it? And another kind of a two-part question, and the second part is why is there lack of engineering when it comes to development from Agile? Is that purely cultural? Are they related? Will AI help?
Yeah, there's two reasons. One is that we have this leftover aspect of culture of job security where people withhold design information or they don't create it in the first place because they want it just in their own head. You feel like that will be beneficial to them as an individual or to their small unit within the large organization. It's very harmful to their organization. So I think that's the primary driver. The other might be, okay, we have a schedule, we're in a hurry, we got to do things very quick. So it's either being in a hurry, or you might call it laziness in some cases, that we just don't want to bother if no one's expecting it, right? So this is part of the solution. I talked about contracts earlier, but also if you're developing something internally and you're a project manager, or you're an executive which is overseeing all of this work, you need to ensure that your engineers are engineering things, and you need to insist on it. It's up to you really to make sure that these things are done, because otherwise you're creating black boxes. And okay, so your folks finished a week earlier because they didn't engineer anything. That week is going to cost you a year or more later, when you need to reverse engineer this big black box and figure out what it was that these people built.
It's funny because it comes down to being a people problem. People just want security. It's like, it's to me, it's related to like what's the classic story of the rat catchers back in the medieval days. They hired people to kill rats until they figured out if we kill all the rats, we're out of a job. So there's always rats around.
Like great rats. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. There's probably many government agencies that are out there, and I won't name any of them, but their job is to solve some problem, but the problem can't go away. Or if you look at, for instance, our funding of Pakistan in order to gain an advantage over the Taliban, if Pakistan really allowed us to eliminate the Taliban,
they'd be out of.
Then they wouldn't get their billions of dollars, right? So it's a good thing to have the Taliban around from their point of view.
Well, and I like the story. Not everybody's a fan, but like Elon Musk, when he had that data center move, the consultant said it's going to take you 6 months to move it. You can't. Where you alluded to, there are these systems. We don't know what they are. It's going to take you 6 months. And he pulled up with a bunch of trucks. They unplugged them all. 2 days later, moved them. And everything was working. And
Elon Musk always does what people tell him is impossible.
I like it's going to take bold moves, because I think for anybody, and I have a technical background, small data center, and I think a lot of technical people they're probably nodding their head when you mentioned. Everybody knows that there's a computer server somewhere, but it's not labeled. Even if it's labeled, nobody knows what the hell it is, and it's on. And people are saying, whatever you do not touch it, don't turn it off, don't even bump it, because it's so And I think everybody can relate. Like, yeah, and it was so fascinating. I want to, if there's any last minute questions. I know that we went a little bit long, but this is why it's a deep dive. You covered so many topics. I'm just stuck on that model. I love models, and that knowledge model for data science. That could be something that's really interesting if data scientists start using that as like, hey, no, here's kind of the standard of these phases. How does our technology or data relate to? Thank you, Jonathan. How does our project relate to level 0, level 1, level 2? I was playing with a model I created on AI adoption. That's very basic, simple things. That it's just a good mental model. Like, oh, that's right. We don't even know. We need knowing that we have the data is important. So we got to design and engineer it so that we actually know we have the data. I mean, you have some really good examples, and I'm not a data guy, but this is actually making sense. So you did a great job on that. But I just like this 4 levels of knowing. I think this is an interesting thing.
Yeah, and you were asking, Arthur, like what are the odds that we can solve this? Being as it's largely a cultural problem and so forth. Well, I think salons like this really are part of the solution. So we need to start socializing it, getting it out there, spreading some awareness. I think that really is our best chance at making a difference.
Yeah, and are they teaching this in colleges right now, like for people going into the field of data science?
No, not that I know of. Although I did put together a lesson for Udacity. So if there's anyone out there that wants to take a course in Next Generation, at least part of Next Generation, you can take that Udacity course.
Can you send it to me, and I'm going to put it into the email for the people that registered. I'll put it into the notes for the because it's funny because when I met you at the CDO conference, I do a lot of speaking for CIOs and CISOs, and the conversation's really heavy on AI. But lately, when I start asking now that I know how to ask the right questions, they're like, yeah, it's not AI. Yes, AI is important to get in there, but we need data scientists because we need people to understand what the heck's going on with AI.
Yeah, and I've done a fair amount of training on this. So when I was with the Space Force, I trained over 100 Space Force guardians and civilians in next generation in a 3-day seminar. So, there's been some work to get out. There's the book on next generation. And so we need to get the word out, and we'll make a huge difference by having good data systems.
Yeah, this is great. And so, any information that we followed up, I'm going to make sure everybody gets it. I'll put it into the notes for the live stream. But I want to thank you again and John, if you want to put up the contact slide, for people to get in touch with you, there's your LinkedIn and Amazon/author/Mark Brady for your book. I'm assuming it's not an easy read, but although it's
all written in plain English, and if you're totally non-technical, I'll just ask and I'll tell you what are the easy chapters, because there are some very easy
chapters. It's an approachable book. It's not going to be super technical, which is great.
It was intended to all be written in plain English with no jargon.
But I want to thank you so much for doing this again. And if you're up for another one down the road, let's definitely talk about that, because we want to balance more entry-level salons, but also I want to balance the deep dives where it is going to get a little technical. It's going to get very cerebral, but I enjoy that, and a lot of people in our community do enjoy that. So everything doesn't have to be very simple and high level. No, we can go deep on topics. This is a fascinating topic, and what I love about what you shared is so much of this. And this is what I love about the AI is so much of this is new. It's like even that model. It's like, no, you just created this. That when the previous salon, you talked about the laws, the 6 laws for AI. You're like, no, you're watching for the audience. We're watching progress as we speak. This is not like a 10, 20-year-old model or book. No, this is being created as we speak, which I think is fascinating to be part of that. So
yeah, and I'm really glad that you brought Rich in and his experiences with this. Really ring true. It's a great example, and the progress that he's making sounds excellent as well.
Well, I want to thank you again. Thank you for the community for being part of this, and thank you so much, Mark. Thank you, appreciate it, and we'll sign off.
All right.
Good night.
It's been
fun. Human beings, we're wired to be connected. From birth, we look for that connection. Where internet connectivity ends and a non-connected society exists, the desire exists to be connected. Once they find connectivity, this city starts to grow. It grows first from an educational perspective.
No longer can the top 3 goals of education be